right, awesome. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, colleagues, GCC students, and visiting members of the community. My name is Kevin Dimatulak. I'm a counselor for the Student Equity Department, and also I'm the Cultural Diversity Coordinator for GCC. I'm very pleased to see you all this afternoon for today's event as we begin our Black History Month celebration. This year's theme is celebrating Blackness, and what better way to begin than by having one of our very own students host our first event to kick things off. So before we begin, I'm gonna just take care of some logistics. I'm gonna share my screen really quickly. For those of you that haven't seen any of our promotional materials or my emails referring to Black History Month programming this year, you can locate all information for Black History Month events on the Cultural Diversity website. So it'll open up with our flyer just with a quick glance of what we have going on up until the end of, through February. And then at the bottom here, you'll see events more specifically detailed by week. So this week we are beginning our Art and Literature Week. And you'll see that Flex and CPGU offered is offered for this event. You'll see descriptions for each event as well as biographies for any of our presenters. So just to kind of give you a quick glance here. You'll also find the Zoom links to also access each event, okay? Some pretty cool stuff that we have lined up here. So I encourage you to visit this website and to stay up to date on what is going on for our programming. This is a reminder as well that this event will be recorded. So if you choose not to have any of your likeness reflected in the recording, please take the time to turn your video off and adjust your participant name as necessary. There's also a sign-in sheet that is going to be shared in the chat. All attendees must sign in, including community members. And if you have any trouble signing in, if you're logging in through a phone, just feel free to private message questions, which is Hoover Zariani, with your name and any other relevant information so he can add you onto the sign-in sheet. If you have any questions throughout the course of the event, you may direct those questions to him as well. After our student presenter has finished, the chat will then open up to everyone for questions, comments, or reactions. Okay, so that's it for my portion. So I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to David Crawford to kick things off. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. My name is David Crawford, and I'm the Student Services Technician at the Multicultural and Community Engagement Center. I also serve as the co-advisor of BSU with Ms. Alexandra Evans of the Student Equity Department. Today, I'm honored and I'm also excited to facilitate today's conversation. It's AAVE, a conversation with Rylee Happy. Rylee Happy is also in BSU, so I'm super excited to hear her talk on this topic. Rylee Happy is a freshman at Glendale Community College, where she double majors in biology and psychology. Her interest in social justice reform, women's health, and celebrating Blackness began during her freshman year of high school, where she joined the Black Student Union. When she's not advocating for the rights of others, she enjoys cooking new foods and playing her guitar. After today's conversation, we will, again, like we said, we'll open it up to conversation discussion, and you'll have the opportunity to unmute yourself. As she's going through her presentation, you'll have the opportunity to follow along with an essay as well. So we'll put that in the chat feature. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Rylee Happy.
Will the slides go up now, or?
You got the slides over?
All right. Ave, African American Vernacular English. You can go to the next slide. Over. I'm sure all of you have heard of Aave. If you haven't heard of it in an educational setting, then I'm sure you've heard people use it. Examples of Aave include lit, woke, hella, anything like that. And in today's society, with the age of social media, I think that everybody can agree that Aave has been heavily used across different platforms. Last spring semester, I took a linguistics course and I had to write about anything linguistics related for an assignment, and I chose Aave because it's something I'm passionate about. It's something I want to educate others about. There's a big stigma surrounding Aave, and I just think it's really important that people know the truth about it. Next slide. So, African American Vernacular English is theorized to have come about during the time of the slave trade, when masters would teach their slaves English and then slaves passed it on to their own children. And it is its own distinct dialect. It is not an accent. So, what makes up a dialect is its grammar, its morphology, how the words are formed, syntax, how words are arranged in sentences, and vocabulary. What is different between a dialect and an accent is that an accent is just purely the pronunciation. So that's something to consider there as well. I've heard a lot of people talk about, those that have a black scent. That doesn't exist. It's its own dialect. Next slide. So African American Vernacular English really differs from General American English. General American English is the English that you would use in a job interview or when you're writing a paper for an English class in college. It's kind of that formal, stuffy language that a lot of us know how to speak, but don't really do it when we're with friends or at home. Next slide. Here are the ways that African American Vernacular English and General American English are different. When you're speaking Aave, the E and the I that appear before nasalized consonants tend to sound the same. So if you were to say, I feel fine, in Aave it would turn into, I feel fine. In General American English, feel and fill are just pronounced differently. Another rule is the R deletion rule. This is when it appears before vowels. So when vowels precede an R. So an example would be, I have a guard dog would turn into, I have a god dog. And then, of course, the habitual be. So one example of this is the sentence, Kathy be lying. That would mean that Kathy habitually lies. It's something that she does over and over. Where in General American English, Kathy be lying would just mean that she is currently lying at this exact moment. And these are just a few of the rules that I found the most interesting. There are tons more that you can look up. Next slide. So why is Aave stigmatized? I have a quote here. Aave is highly stigmatized, often due to implicit, thinly veiled, or overt racism, and many African Americans consciously avoid using features of Aave due to the stigma. So the ramifications of the stigmatization of Aave can be really, really dire and extremely catastrophic. Next slide. The stigma kills. So in the Trayvon Martin case, where Trayvon Martin was shot and murdered by George Zimmerman, the judge did not take the testimony that was spoken in Aave seriously, and linguistics professor John R. Rickford said that he believes that was part of the reason that Zimmerman got off in the first place. Next slide. So because Aave is so stigmatized, people that speak it, which are primarily Black people, can ease this discrimination and otherment by doing something called code switching. The dictionary defines code switching as alternating between two or more languages or dialects in any given sentence and conversation. And Chandra Arthur has an amazing TED Talk on this titled The Art of Code Switching, where she describes the cops being called on her in her own home, and she credits code switching to her ability to get out of the situation unscathed. And she has a quote up here that just really speaks to me that says, Instead of the brand of diversity which purports that minorities are acceptable provided they behave in a specific way, what about a truer sense of diversity, where people are praised for their uniqueness and the cultural capital they bring to places and situations, as opposed to being disciplined or shamed for it? Next slide. And in conclusion, African American Vernacular English is a valid dialect, not an accent, with its own grammar and vocabulary, and most Aave speakers are actually bidialectal. This means they're easily able to traverse between African American Vernacular English and General American English. Aave is highly stigmatized due to racism, and the stigmatization of Aave kills.
Thank you, Rylee. I had the privilege of reading your essay, which is a fantastic essay. One of the many things that comes to mind to me is when you mentioned the stigma of AAVE. In your research, in preparing your essay and writing your essay, did you were you able to find the origins of that stigma, or like how far AAV goes back? Because I'm curious if you can kind of share some of that with the audience.
Yeah, so that actually goes back to the time of slavery. English was used as this colonial weapon against Black people, and against people of color in general, where they were just forced to learn it, and then they were separated, to keep their own people from being able to understand each other and communicate with each other. And this stigma dates back to, 400 plus years ago. Yeah.
Before I ask another question, Hoover, do we have any questions by any chance? We can obviously unmute too as well, but I want to make sure I give other people an opportunity. When Rylee came to us about this, we wanted to have a conversation about this topic, and so I'm curious for the people in the audience, what comes to mind, I guess, when we think about AAVE in terms of, we're working as a higher ed institution, and so, in higher ed, we serve students of many backgrounds and ethnicities. I often wonder, what can we do, right, as educators, as staff, faculty, to really promote an environment welcoming for our students. Can you speak to some of that maybe, right? Like some things are helpful for our students?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being praised, right, I think it starts young. It starts in our elementary schools. It's the language that we use with people that speak Ave, and being able to praise people for being bidialectal and switching between different dialects is really important, because it teaches them that the way that they're speaking is okay, and that it's actually good. Like it's something that they can do that other people can't do. And so often we see people that speak Ave being told that they're ignorant, or that they're uneducated, or that they're lesser than in some way. And this starts young. So, it's no different in college when you're told to speak proper English, or certain things, like allow different things inside of the classroom, allow different perspectives, different backgrounds, and meet people where they're at.
We do have one question. Um, and the question is, what are your thoughts on non-Black people who speak Ave?
I get this question a lot, actually. It's kind of the number one thing people ask me. And my answer is just that if you grew up in a certain environment, you're going to speak it. And I'm not saying that nobody other than Black people can speak and use Ave, but a lot of the time, like I mentioned, the age of social media, there is this um, tendency to borrow things from Black culture in the sense of remaining relevant or being popular on social media, and without giving credit to Black people. So, when you're using the language that isn't familiar to you, I can tell when people are speaking it and they weren't raised in it, because they just don't sound right. like I mentioned, Aave has its own grammatical rules, it has its own structure. It's not just these vocabulary or slang words thrown together. So that's something to be wary of. If you didn't grow up speaking it and you don't know how to use it, then I think that that's a different case than if you grew up speaking it, that was the neighborhood you were around, or you were adopted, or, any other situation. So that's my view on that.
We have a couple of other questions. One is, what are the panel's thoughts about allowing students to use Aave in formal essay writing?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm kind of stumped. I think that education as a whole caters to a certain group of people, and it was born to cater to a certain group of people. I don't think that students should be penalized for speaking in Aave or writing in Aave, but I think that they should be taught instead how to traverse, between General American English and African American Vernacular English. And it can be this tool, this ability they have, rather than this thing that they're shamed for. So I think like having a conversation with somebody that does speak Aave is one of the most important things you can do if you don't understand it.
Okay. And there's one more, it's kind of a long question, so bear with me. Okay, so this reminds me a bit of the controversy over Ebonics in San Francisco, but I believe it was Oakland, it was the Bay Area, being taught in schools in the 90s. Proponents made the argument that it was a valid language with valid historical and cultural context. Critics stated that it should not be taught because it was incorrect English, in quotes, and folks needed to learn proper English to be successful in the professional world. How do you suggest those views be balanced in this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have done my own research on that. And, in that situation, when I Googled that, I did a lot of research on that for the paper that I wrote. And I ended up not using that as a statistic or an example, because when I Googled it, I got all of these memes popping up, which were extremely offensive. And I think that the stigma around Aave, it's like permeated into every aspect of our being. It's still here. And that aged question of like, well, it's improper English or you shouldn't be using it. First, I would like to look at what is proper English and where does proper English come from? Who taught you proper English? Um, and why is English that sounds a little different from yours viewed as improper? Humans innately have this tendency to classify. It's a psychological thing that we do, and it's not always the right thing to do. So I guess my answer to that would be, again, like, you can have a conversation with people and you can learn, what Aave sounds like and how your students are using it. And then they can learn what General American English is and how they can use that. And that's something that they can utilize later in life.
And thanks to Sarah, who's reminding us that it was Oakland 1996, and it was a big topic of conversation at the time in the Bay Area. Yeah.
Yes.
So a couple of more questions, or David, did you have something?
Well, I just wanted to while we're on this topic, that we have some conversation going in the chat. Sydney said, I believe decolonization requires making space for different definitions of proper, in quotes, and what's deemed acceptable. So that's something that's been going to discussion. The only thing I was going to add to that, when you were speaking, Rylee, about, being open to that in the classroom in terms of writing. I've never taught English class, but I've taught screenwriting and playwriting classes. And that was a topic that came up many times in creative writing, whether it's poetry, whether it's screenplays, whether it's plays. And like you said, what you were talking about in your essay reminds me of multilingual kids, right, early in their formation of their development, right, and how we'll praise the fact that a child can speak multiple languages, right, and so I just kind of got that correlation right now as I'm hearing you talk about your essay, is that that correlation, did that come up in your research, like the idea of bilingual children?
Yes, yeah, it did. And people that can traverse between these two, General American English and Aave are referred to as like bidialectal. So it's like a very similar thing to being bilingual.
And then the one thing I want to add, Professor Fonro said, I recommend Anthro 105 Culture and Communication, that has a whole unit on this topic using Smitherin and Sammy Allen. So just, we'll save the chat. And so if we can kind of collect any recommendations that professors or staff members or attendees are dropping in, that way we can have a, not necessarily a LibGuide, but like just a research of some of the things they're dropping in. And for anyone who signs in today, Rylee said that we can send a copy of the PowerPoint as well as the essay, so you'll definitely get that. So if you're having trouble signing in, you can either send in your information to myself or questions, whoever, and we'll make sure you get on the sign-in sheet. We just need the relevant information, like if you're a faculty, staff, or student, along with your name.
It got fixed, the sign-in sheet, so we're okay. Yeah. Okay, couple of more questions. The linguistic examples are excellent. Is Aave codified in a way, not necessarily a scholarly text, that catalogs its grammatical and synthetical rules? That's the question. And since you all can unmute yourselves, feel free to ask or um, explain like what your question means, because that can be a little bit confusing. So.
Yeah, if it's possible for whoever wrote that to unmute and like explain it a little more, I think I can better answer it that way.
Maybe they don't want to, but that's okay. I can go to the next question. As an instructor, how can I prepare other students in the class to the Aave experiences that they might hear from someone speaking this?
Hmm. Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure, sure. As an instructor, how can I prepare other students in the class to the Aave experiences that they might hear from someone speaking?
Oh, I think like to keep into consideration when you're entering a diverse setting that there are going to be diverse views. And it's kind of how, for me, when I prepare myself walking into a classroom, I'm thinking, there will be people that have different opinions than I do. There will be people that look differently than I do. There's going to be people that don't like the way that I have, my viewpoints. They don't like what I believe in. So just explaining to the class, like holding different viewpoints and sitting with that balance is really important. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. If you're hearing people that don't sound like you, maybe try to have a conversation with them and understand where they're coming from.
And here's an interesting question I didn't think about. Is Aave standard within the US, or does it differ depending on what region one grew up in?
So there are actually different types of Aave that are spoken, depending where you're from. Like in Texas, they have their own version of Aave, their own slang, everything, different to them. So it's kind of like a language, right? You have Spain Spanish, you have Mexican Spanish, you have like different types of the same language. It's very similar in that aspect.
Right? Um,
Hoover, the person who asked that question, I was able to fix the unmute issue, so I don't know if they want an opportunity to expand on the question.
That was me, David. Thank you for trying to keep it on. And for your help. I asked the question, and I guess you partially just addressed that question, Rylee. But as Julie noted in the chat, the English division is constantly talking about decolonizing writing and what that would look like and what it would mean for graduates. The pros, the cons, the complications, preparing students for the workforce, which is perhaps not entirely prepared to see decolonized writing accepted, and does that sort of jeopardize the opportunities our students would face going forward? All these are sort of conversations that are in the mix. But part of that was also, I was wondering, and you kind of answered it when you said that, you know, there's different Aves, but it's interesting to me that you had these very specific linguistic rules in your slideshow. And I wanted to know if there was like a source, like an authoritative source that, and, you know, again, it doesn't have to be like a scholarly text or like a, you know, a grammar Bible or anything like that, but just something that sort of a source that would explain or be like an authority on how, you know, what the grammatical and syntactical structures would be, how words would be pronounced, things like that.
So yeah, actually there is one that I was largely consulting when I was writing the paper that I based the presentation off of. It's in the works cited. So if the PDF is in the chat, which I think it should be, there's the works cited section of that. All of those are like extremely useful. And there's one in particular that a lot of these rules are explained.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I just added the PDF of Rylee's paper, so you can download it and look at it there. One thing, if you are all interested, I'm looking, oh, there it is. Professor Fonerwell says you all need to take Anthro 105 because there's a whole unit on this topic. So if you didn't know that, which I didn't, Anthro 105, she highly recommends.
Hoover, it looks like we have a question. Sarah, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah.
It's a comment, not a question,
Okay.
but I'm so glad that this talk is happening. I'm so thankful for Rylee for sharing her essay. And Julie Gamberg, one of our faculties, also mentioned this a bit in the chat, but it's really great synergy because this really is the focus of our keynote at our English division retreat tomorrow morning on the ideas of next level English and positionality, students' right to their own language. So I've been in touch with Sydney, and I did invite the BSU board to attend our retreat. If you're interested in coming tomorrow, I didn't realize there'd be quite so much synergy, or I would have invited you earlier, so I'm sorry for the last minute nature. But if anyone who's here is interested in learning more about these ideas and really thinking proactively about what this means, what this looks like, and how do we work collaboratively in a classroom to empower students to use their own language, I'm happy to share the Zoom info for our 9 a.m. session, which will be led by Michelle Gonzalez, who's one of the leaders of the Next Level English movement at Las Positas College in Northern California. Awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Please share that in the chat. I would love to find out more information about that for sure. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes,
of course.
Sydney. So I just wanted to comment on something that Rylee said in regards to English being used historically, but also currently as a colonial weapon, and how, especially as questions are, popping up around, how to ensure student success and all of that as we get into the workforce and things like that. And I think it's really important to just continue to remember the role of English in colonization and how it has been used not only, against enslaved African Americans, but those who, were in America that did not speak English. And so when we're thinking about how to make space for those who speak Aave, it would be the same way that we would be required to make space for those who speak any other language, because Aave is a valid language with its own vocab, as Rylee said, and its own grammatical structure. And so just as we would make space for any other language and be accepting and welcoming of those languages and understanding, that would be the same case for Aave. And I think that also as we consider, you know, the process of specifically African American folks having to hop back and forth between Aave, which is what we might speak in our homes and amongst people that we're comfortable and familiar with, and you know, what's considered proper English in academic settings and in the workplace and things like that, then I think that there definitely does need to be conversation around that being considered bilingual or I forget what you said, Rylee, was it bi-dialectal or something like that? But it just giving it the respect of being recognized as a legitimate language. And I also think too, as conversation continues around decolonization, especially for the English division, which has a major responsibility to decolonize and see how that shows up in different departments, that I feel like we're always gonna kind of be in this space where it's like, well, if we teach people Aave or we allow people to use Aave, then they're not going to be successful. So we must continue, not saying that's what's being said, but we must continue to teach this, you know, proper English. Like at some point we have to be change makers and we have to be finding the solutions to make space for all of the differences. And then eventually the rest of the society will follow suit. But at some point we have to be the ones willing to make that shift in a way that, you know, is representative and inclusive of all of us.
Yeah, I actually really couldn't agree more. I think you said it perfectly.
We do have one more question that I hadn't thought about. This person has a lot of great questions. And the question is it possible to have an accent on top of a dialect like Aave, or does it become a different type of Aave?
You know, I'm really not sure. I'd probably have to defer to like a linguist on that. Not an expert on everything, unfortunately, as much as I would like to be, but that's a really, really interesting question. Yeah.
Okay, and Professor Fonderel says accent and dialect are different things.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alexandra. I'm a student equity counselor, and I'm coming from the standpoint of a counselor. And so working with students, and this is a wonderful conversation, and it's something that is really important. And we don't really have this conversation enough. You know what I mean? This is not something that we traditionally talk about when we talk about racism and discrimination and bias and prejudice and all that kind of stuff. This topic doesn't typically come up, language, but it's very, very important. And so, you know, what I want to put out there is just like, you know, very straightforward and probably non-academic, but just in terms of humans. And a human comes up to you and they don't speak, you know, standard white English in the way that, you know, we're taught and we're expected to speak. How does that feel for you? You know, are there certain tones that make you uncomfortable? You know, I mean, this is something that we can all think about, you know, and the type of emotions that bring up. And I'd like to kind of, I guess maybe ask Rylee, you know, would you be able to explain, because I know in your paper you talk about it, but what kind of effects does that have on a person, on a student, or just a person in general in business, in the workplace? If you are not able to speak, you know, in standard English, if that's what you either choose not to speak, or if you didn't grow up in the type of environment that, you know, produced that particular type of language, you know, what kind of effects does that have being in, let's say, even a predominantly white institution when you don't have that white standard foundation?
Unfortunately, it's this immediate form of like otherment, right? It's, you know, you're different than everybody else and you are the one that has the problem. And I think, again, unfortunately, where we're at right now within the education system, it is like a punishment is handed down for that. And I do talk about it a bit in my paper. And I've had personal experiences with it. I've had experiences where my friends were seen as a certain way. I had a friend through middle school, through high school, got straight A's. She was the leader in like all the sports clubs she was in, but she was never seen the same that other white friends I had were seen, and in the same way because of how she spoke. So there can be disastrous consequences. And it's hard being in a primarily white institution and speaking Ave, which is this language that is also just associated with Black people. And it's difficult. And I think to have to traverse through that is painful for a lot of people.
Hey, Riley, just to kind of piggyback on that, from a standpoint from a classified staff member, I know we have some classified staff here. Oftentimes, it's two versions of coming into the college experience, right? It's the initial experience, that's, admissions, that's financial aid, that's enrollment office, that's all those things. And before you even get in the classroom with your professor, right, your instructor, can you speak to some of the things that we could do maybe as an institution? I mean, I think Black students make up roughly, I think 3% of the population. And so you mentioned Ave and in a dialect. How can we create that atmosphere from the get-go? Because we do have students that are not just from our geographical area, the Glendale area, but they come from all over LA. And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I want to see people that look like me. I want to see people that can speak how I speak. And I want to see that as soon as I'm coming into a college, in the financial aid department, in, admissions and records. I want to see people that look like me. So I think diversity is the most important thing. And also just making space for Black people. So having a space set out for them, or anybody that speaks a non-standard type of English. I think that's really important. And then for people that are working with those students, like being educated on Ave or being educated on different types of English and what your students can sound like to you and how to interpret that and how to best help them.
Thank you. And then we kind of passed this topic up, but you mentioned it earlier in terms of, you talked about, so I think the question was, can non-Blacks use Ave, right? And so my question to you in reference to that question, when does it become appropriate? When is it appropriation and when is it kind of maybe a borderline theft or, like, where do you draw that distinction in your research or just from your personal experience? Because I know you mentioned that a little bit in your conversation.
Sure. I think if you're benefiting from Black culture, from Black language, without doing any of the work to support Black people, seek out Black people as friends, uplift Black people, then that's where I would draw the line. I had a friend that would speak in Ave and was very, yes, sis, and whatever she was saying. And didn't actually want to support Black people and support Black culture, didn't know any Black people other than me, didn't want to, wasn't seeking those people out, and wasn't having the difficult conversations. I think if you grew up in it and you're able to have those difficult conversations with Black people about what it means to only speak Ave, how are those people looked at differently? How many opportunities do we lose for only being able to speak Ave? And, if you're not willing to talk about that, that's where I draw the line.
Yeah. Sydney put, it literally cost us opportunities as an already marginalized group.
Yeah.
So just to kind of, I feel as if you aren't a part of a Black community, didn't grow up in it, have no connections, and are benefiting from the impression of Black folks, don't use Ave. Just my opinion. So that's just Sydney's opinion right there. But yeah, there's a lot of great conversation that's been happening about this. And so, first of all, before I say something, do we have any more questions, Hoover? You're muted.
sorry, I do it constantly. Actually, one that kind of goes with what was just mentioned.
Go ahead.
There are a couple more. How can non-Black people, usually millennial or Gen Z kids, who speak Ave unknowingly, unpack the fact that they are appropriating a language? So I guess how do you help them unpack that they are appropriating?
Well, I think it's interesting what you said. How do I help them unpack that? Because I don't think that's my work to do. I think that's something that they should be seeking out. I think that they should be trying to educate themselves and learning where this language is coming from and learning why they're only using it when it's referring to something silly, right? And when we're looking at social media, the tendency to use Ave is very prevalent there. Why? You know? So really doing that research for themselves before trying to come to Black people and get education from other Black people, because that's, you know, labor that we're putting out that's kind of continuous for the stigma that we still have. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rylee. I think we have a question from George. George, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question or your comment.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just want to comment on that particular question as a non-Black person who grew up speaking Ave. No, I admit I was in constant contact and communion with African Americans and Black people. And while I didn't realize that there was a term for it, I do understand that I was making a conscious decision to use that type of language amongst my Black peers, with certain exceptions, of course, certain words and things like that. But having grown up, having come to understand that it can be culture appropriation, I've had to come to terms that I've had to unlearn a way of talking that I grew up with. And to speak to that particular question, I think that one good thing or one way to go about it is now you've learned, you've gotten this information. Now go back amongst your community and maybe talk to your own people and let them know, hey, we use certain words, we use certain language. Unfortunately, we have been doing things or saying things that we didn't really realize could hurt people, and maybe it's time to change these things. So I think the point I'm trying to make is a way of unpacking it is going back to your own community, going back to your own home, and starting to have these hard conversations, because sometimes they can be tough, but they are necessary conversations to have. And like Rylee said, it's not for the Black community to teach us or to say, oh, you know, I never knew this and this isn't. Well, now you know, and now the work can begin, and it's a positive thing. It's not a negative thing. It's a positive thing. You know, we are human. We are complex human beings, and I think that to be, before I get out of topic, I just think that that's one thing. The one way of unpacking it is by choosing to have those hard conversations, and that takes courage. So, you know, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, you know, when people are talking about ignorance, it's this term that has a really negative connotation, but it doesn't have to. You know, like once you start having those difficult conversations, it leads to gaining new knowledge. I'm ignorant about a lot of things, I'm assuming, you know, I'm sure, as we all are. And the only way that I can learn is if I ask or if I do the research myself. So I really value those conversations. That's where the work is.
And in the chat, Nisha brings up the flip side of that, kind of. She says, I'm curious about that, Sydney. If we seek to legitimize languages, why wouldn't you want someone being able to learn how to use Aave? Not in appropriation context, but similar to, for example, teaching German or French, etc. Like, what is the difference of the two, I guess?
Can I respond?
Of course.
So I think the difference is that as it stands, that Aave is not treated as a legitimate language and it's not given the dues as all of the other languages. And so as specifically speaking for, African American folks, and when we use Aave, we are denied opportunities. Our livelihood is impacted by it. And so for those who have the benefit of not dealing with that oppression because of their whiteness or, being non-Black people of color and using Aave and still having access to those opportunities where we do not. I think that that's the difference. And so as, it kind of goes through the legitimization, I guess, and that we're no longer being subjugated for using it while everyone is able to use it and getting pats on the back and things like that, then I think that the conversation becomes a little bit different.
Yeah.
And can I add to that or ask a follow-up question? So I totally agree with that in this current state that we're in. I guess part of what I battle with is drawing such distinct lines that may prevent normalization. So in order for something to be accepted, we have to accept it. So my question is kind of like, if we don't allow people to accept it or tell them they can't be a part of that, like, for example, Jorge grew up in that community and that is his cultural context. It may not be his ethnic heritage, but it's his cultural context. Why would it be inappropriate for him? Sorry, I'm like, we're working out while we're talking, so if I run out of breath, I apologize. But why would it be inappropriate for Jorge to continue to use that and help normalize that experience and help normalize that language as something that is not bad? I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but I mean, I agree that right now there's a lot of work to be done to accept people for who they are and not put one culture or community above another. But I just think the part of that exploration is necessary.
So in the distinctions that were made by Rylee and then also by myself, we were acknowledging that, language or dialects can be environmental. And so if you grow up in those neighborhoods and if you grow up around certain communities, then that might be a natural extension of the language that you use. And so that the biggest part about it is the fact that overarchingly, Aave is not recognized as a valid language. And until it is done so in ways that are systematically equitable, like all of the other languages, then those who want to use it, I just really want, I guess, everyone to ask themselves the question, why is it that you all want to use it so much, but then why are we not also using that same energy to ensure the legitimization of Aave?
Couple of things. I know we have a couple of hands raised. I'm going to go, Jorge, with April first because you spoke, and then we'll circle back to you if you don't mind. So April, if you want to go ahead and mute yourself and share.
And Jeannie wanted to share also.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the noise. I just wanted to comment on the distinction. There are tons of languages that are already deemed languages, for example, Bahamian dialect, but they're versions of English. So like in regards to the previous comment and question, you wouldn't necessarily, what would be the function of using that if you're a non-Black learner? Like if you learn that language and you didn't grow up speaking it, in which situation would you use that in? You're not going to get hired by an international corporation to translate to a group of people. Do you know what I mean? So that's the differentiation. It can still be legitimized academically without being co-opted as the other languages that are clearly learned languages to communicate. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Thank you. Jorge and then Jeannie.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to comment on the, I agree, it does seem like, if you grew up, for me, and I believe my example was used, if you grow up around a certain environment and you grow up speaking a certain way, why should you have to, change it up? And one of the biggest, the greatest points that was made is that the work has to be done. The work is not done. The work is beginning to be done or has been done. So we cannot fast forward to, okay, well, we're a beautiful oasis. We're a melting pot. We're really not. That's not what we are. We're working towards that. So I think that until we get there, and I think this point has been made already, is, until we get there, then we can decide, hey, you know what, maybe it's okay. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. The work has not been done, and we cannot treat it as it has, and we're all good, because we're not. We're headed there.
Thank you, Jorge. Jeannie, did you still want to share with us?
Yes, hello everyone. I want to put a little thought within myself, and I wanted to share. Our plans here at our college campus, they're to prosper. It's not to harm us of the suggestion of change, but it's a plan to give you a more better hope for your future. It took me a while to understand that. And as far as April and George and Sydney and everyone giving their great comments, I want to thank Happy, Miss Happy, Rylee Happy, I believe her name is. Very interesting topic about Aave, because it could be a good and it could be a bad thing. And me, myself, from back in the 60s, I always switched it on, switched it off, just like a light switch. You have times and places where you need to use it, but then it is not appropriate to have in your everyday life. I can understand the change. I understand the English, the vocabulary, the way you speak is very important for your success in the business world. Proper language, I don't understand, because our ancestors came from an island or a country or another place of a different language, whether it's Guatemala, Colombia, Guadalajara, Africa, it doesn't matter, French, whatever. What is English? Proper English. We have been stripped away from our personality, our taste of what flavor of life is. And we're bending towards leaving Aave, which I understand why, and I agree, drop it out of your life. But I don't know, it roughs my feathers. But I want to unite and understand, not being aggressive, but getting to declare who Jeannie Presley is as an individual, and when and how to act. Because when I switch on, switch off, it makes me feel not complete. And yes, having your family, teaching your culture, this is the proper way. It is the proper way to speak and change to the English dialect, the way of presenting yourself, routines, manners, all kind of things. I understand it all fit together with the Aave. They say bad associations spoil useful habits. And if you want to succeed, yes, you must drop the Aave. But then sometimes, I don't know. I'm straddled the fence with all of that. So I'm hoping someone can help me out with this speaking at home dropping what's not at home, and speak all this proper English at all times, 24/7. Can someone help me?
Well, I think, like when I mentioned code switching, like you mentioned, being able to switch it on and off like a light switch, that's something a lot of people do intrinsically. It's something that just happens depending where you're at. And that's because people know speaking Aave in certain situations will not get them looked at favorably. And I think that's where the work needs to be done. I don't think that people should have to change the way they speak to conform to this language that a lot of people were taught anyways here. Like it's not a lot of people's first language. So I don't think that you should be able to, I think you should be able to speak Aave in any setting that you want, and be respected for speaking it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of our time. We do have one more question. Professor Peterson Maite, can you mute yourself, please?
Hi, David. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rylee, for your presentation. It's like so enlightening. And obviously, I think a lot of us have a lot of questions and ideas about it. I wanted to touch back on the point of whether it should be taught as other languages are taught, and then possibly also connecting it to what Ms. Presley was talking about. I really agree with what Sydney, what Rylee, Jorge were all saying about it. The other thing is that we see, even with what Ms. Presley's saying, we see the struggle, right? In like, do you code switch? When do you code switch? When should you use it? When should you hide it? Like code switch really is about hiding who you are. And so we see that Black folks are still struggling with this. So before we can even start to think about having it taught to other people as a language, we have to first grapple with where we are now. Otherwise, it turns into just like it's happened time and time again, where Black folks are not recognized. The Black community is not recognized, and it doesn't become cool and it's not acceptable until white folks are doing it. So I think we really need to grapple with where we are now. And as we can see again with what Ms. Presley was saying, there's a lot of struggle. It's not that it's like an easy thing, right? So that's just the part that I wanted to add there. And again, just to reiterate, we run into the danger of turning, I mean, think about jazz, think about hip hop, think about rap, that it's like, it was something that they did, that sort of thing, until all of a sudden, it becomes like pop culture. So I think it really is, we're not at the point where we could start really talking about teaching it as another language if where it's coming from is not being celebrated and is not being given recognition. So that's just the point that I wanted to make. But again, then thank you, everybody, because this is really great. And I love the questions, and I love everything that everyone is saying is so enlightening. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Hoover. I think, Hoover, you might have a question.
Yeah, there was one question which kind of goes off on this topic, but I thought it was interesting enough, so if we can take 2 extra minutes. The contributions of Black drag performers has influenced much of the spread of Aave in the LGBTQ community. And now I see a lot of LGBT people adopting the way of speaking because they feel it's also integral to their queer identity. So what are your thoughts on how Aave has worked its way into the LGBT community?
Well, I think, being a Black lesbian woman, I see that a lot in my own friend groups and circles, with other queer friends that I have. And I still think it's appropriating. I still think that, like I said, if you didn't grow up speaking Aave, if you weren't around it, if you're not doing the work to unpack like why it's stigmatized when a Black friend of yours speaks it, but why you're seen as cool and relatable when you speak it, then you shouldn't be using it. So I as much as I understand having that person to look up to, or Black drag performers, I still think that there needs to be a separation with You know, what's the difference between them and I? Where did I grow up? Where did they grow up? And, you know, how do I have that conversation with people within the queer community as well?
Yeah, this conversation definitely needs to be continued.
Can I say just one more thing? One thing, I'm sorry. Okay, I just want to address what Mai Tai said. That was excellent because I wanted to just I think there are a lot of instructors in here. And so when you're looking at your students, you know, maybe think about it. You know, if you see a student who's the only Black student in class, you know, think about their experiences, you know, that going back and forth, that struggling. Do I speak like this? Do I speak like that? You know, being able to code switch. What if I don't know how to? What if I don't want to? You know, and so this is all things that we kind of have to deal with as Black people, as faculty, staff. We're aware of our Blackness. And that takes a lot of brain power, okay? It's a lot of, you know, grooves and neural pathways going on in there as we're currently like always thinking about our Blackness in certain situations. And so I just wanted to throw that out there when you see your students, especially if they're by themselves and they're the only one in the class, just, you know, think about, you know, how that person is perceiving their situation and the types of things they have to process just to sit in the class, or just to have enough courage or nerve to raise their hand and speak out and ask questions or state an opinion in a class where they are absolutely the other. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, and then to add to that, Alexandra and myself, we get a list from Dr. Karp and Zoller every semester of all the Black students on campus. And as we look at that list, I can say concretely, a lot of them are not from this area. So when you tackle that on the pressures and the stigma, right? And then traveling a great distance to come to Glendale Community College on, you know, not so much now in an online environment, but it's those little things that will probably determine success rates. You know, we talk about success rates, we talk about retention, we talk about, you know, persistence, all those things that we talk about in our classrooms, in our trainings. But, you know, something such as Aave, I would think it could, you know, jeopardize those rates of the students matriculating, right? And so it's really do not only as individuals have to look at ourselves and say, what can we do? But we also have to look at it like how, if we want to really grow and support all students, in particular in this case, Black students, what can we do and what can we take ownership of to do that? And Rylee, I just want to, you know, on the behalf of the Black History Month Committee and Task Force, we want to thank you for putting on this important conversation today. For those who signed in today, well, we will make sure that we give you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well as the essay if you didn't get a chance to download in the chat. But I'll say, for me, I'll say I definitely think I'm better because of this conversation, and we still need to continue to do this conversation and talk, but then also put in the work, right, in action items to make a change on not just on our campus, but on all campuses. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. That concludes our event and the great conversation that was had. Take care and stay safe, everyone.